The winter of 1891 rode into London on wheels of fog, turning every lamplit street into a floating corridor that seemed unfastened from the solid world. Erasmus Finch welcomed that obscurity. When the world grew vaporous, people believed almost anything was possible, and Finch required precisely that willingness. It was in vapor, after all, that a soul was said to linger before it shed the final tethers of flesh. The young photographer's studio overlooked a narrow mews in Holborn, 3 floors above a pawnbroker's shop. There he brewed chemicals, illegal by the statutes of the Crown and Her Majesty's Royal Society of Chemistry, substances rumored to steal light from death itself. Finch's first camera had belonged to his father, an itinerant portraitist who'd suffocated in a dark tent after a stove overturned. His mother, who sold flowers outside St. Paul's, insisted the father died because he refused to let go of his pictures, even when flames ate the canvases. Erasmus was 10 at the time and remembered the cindered smell, but more than that, he remembered his mother's whispered curse. "Art is a jealous grave." The phrase haunted him through adolescence, finally warping into a question. If art was a grave, might it also be a door? He served a respectable apprenticeship with the Daguerre Society, where he learned to polish plate glass until you could shave by its reflection and to coax silver nitrate into capturing sunlight as faithfully as a confession. During luncheon breaks, he devoured pamphlets on spirit photography, a fad in America where unscrupulous charlatans double-exposed negatives to produce misty apparitions that comforted the grieving for a fee. Finch, convinced that real communion was theoretically possible, scrawled chemical equations in the margins, hypothetical emulsions receptive not merely to photons, but to the subtle emanations mediums called vital fluorescence. The theory stayed theory until he met Mrs. Constance Kestrel, proprietress of a shuttered apothecary on Stepney High Street. The shop was rumored to trade in embryonic reptiles and powdered gallstones, yet its windows were immaculate, and Mrs. Kestrel herself had the practiced posture of a duchess recently dispossessed. Finch, on instinct, showed her a notebook page. She skimmed the formula, silver nitrate enriched with white phosphorus, suspended in a tincture of alchemical salts, known to theosophists as Psalms of Mercury, and looked up with mild amusement. "You'll blister every inch of skin from your bones," she warned, "and still fail. Spirits disdain ordinary matter. You must give them something of themselves to cling to." "And where does one purchase such an intangible?" Finch replied. "I do not sell souls, Mr. Finch," she said, "but I know where residual breath sometimes settles." She lifted a velvet pouch the size of a lady's coin purse. Condensed exhalations gathered at gallows sites. The last sigh of the condemned is drawn into chilled copper flasks. Freeze it swiftly, keep it dark, and it becomes particulate. Her eyes shone with the fervor of a scholar at Bethlehem Royal Hospital. Blend 1 dram with your emotion. Expose your glass at the threshold between quick and dead sunset or dawn. Return here if you survive. Finch obeyed. At twilight, he slipped into Highgate Cemetery, arranged a portable camera atop a pie-crust tomb, and removed the lens cap for 8 heartbeats. A cat yowled. The hairs on his arms rose like pine needles in frost. When he developed the plate in his makeshift darkroom later that night, a gray latticework emerged behind the marble cherub. At its center hovered a boy's face, half-formed yet unmistakably present, his pupils as wide as grief itself. He stared until candle stubs surrendered to dawn. The image frightened him. It also proved him right. Word traveled faster than policemen could quell it. By spring, Finch advertised discreetly, melancholy memorials captured in stillness, images of the dear departed, guaranteed. Families arrived in mourning, black, trembling between hope and propriety. Finch would pose them before a velvet backdrop, instruct them to sit perfectly motionless, and then beckon the invisible to approach. 90 seconds later, he sealed the plate, and the séance was over. To the living, he handed ordinary portrait copies. The true plates, though streaked with vaporous silhouettes, he retained. locking them in oak drawers stacked floor to ceiling. His pretext was preservation, his aim study. For weeks the drawers stayed shut, yet the studio felt crowded. Matches refused to strike unless Finch struck them twice. The clock chimed certain hours thrice instead of once. Breath puffed in clouds, though the stove roared. He dismissed these as physiological quirks brought on by exhaustion, until one night, a crinoline dress swished behind him where no customer stood. He spun. Nothing. The crown glass negatives were rattling in their frames like dice in an aggressive hand. A whisper rose, too close to determine direction. "Let us see." He reinforced the drawers with brass hasps and installed a chain lock across the cabinet doors. The phenomena escalated. Soot shaped itself into drifting loops. Brass picture hooks loosened and fell without sound. A milkman delivering bottles at dawn saw a pale woman leaning out Finch's second-floor casement. She gazed down the mews, mouth open in permanent opera. Startled, he raised a gloved hand. The woman dissolved into morning sun. Soon the ghosts no longer contained themselves to the studio. Mrs. Wycliffe, the widow who owned Finch's boarding house, awoke each night to the smell of pond water in her hallway. She blamed the Thames, until she glimpsed damp footprints ascending the staircase, each print evaporating at the edges, as though someone walked with one foot in this realm, the other in mist. Her complaints to Erasmus grew frantic. He assured her a pipe had burst, though no plumber found leaks. Guilt gnawed him, not least because the faces he saw hovering in the emulsion, sometimes repeated glances later, wandering past lampposts or mirrored in shop windows. A child clutching a wooden horse at Covent Garden was the same spectral boy from Highgate. Two sisters crooning lullabies near Charing Cross were twins he'd photographed for a melancholy mother in May. Each time they noticed Finch, their mouths fluttered, seeking words, yet uttering only wind. He turned again to Mrs. Kestel, who listened with academic delight. "They wish release," she said, folding her mahogany hands. "You have promised sanctuary but provided a corridor. Once beckoned, they must travel onward, not loiter in a cabinet." "How does one provide onwardness?" Finch asked. "You require a tertiary reagent, something capable of converting residua into pure resonance. I possess a vial, but it is unstable. Should its balance fail, the aperture may widen too far." He accepted anyway. The vial contained a syrup that shifted from indigo to vermilion depending on angle. She called it the Benedictus distillate and charged him the price of a quarter year's rent. Finch pawned his father's pocket watch to pay. Back in Holborn, he prepared 7 new plates, each inscribed "overnight" with thin lines of gold leaf to attract passing souls the way polished doorknobs invite fingertips. He positioned them along the studio wall like icons at an altar. At the precise second of equinox dusk, he uncorked the Benedictus and painted a single stroke across each negative. The room stilled, though the city outside groaned with carriage wheels. Then came an inhalation so profound he felt the town itself had taken breath. Figures seeped forward, men in naval coats, women in ruffled morning crepe, infants swaddled in half-light. They slipped into the plates as though into warm pools. One by one the glass surfaces glimmered, clouds dissipated, and only the living photographer remained. He expelled an exultant laugh. That night he slept indulgently, convinced the matter closed. Shortly after 3, something shattered. Finch bolted upright. Moonlight revealed the drawers hanging agape like hungry jaws. Every plate within was spiderwebbed with cracks from the inside. At their centers bloomed caverns of midnight ink. Finch approached, teeth chattering. From the fissures exuded piercing cold, a chill that smelled of birch and river mud. Inside those holes, tiny shapes spiraled. Lanterns held by search parties, or else eyes hunting corridors. He clamped the drawers, hammered them shut, dragged the chest in front. Then he listened. The building itself now seemed to breathe through its bricks, each exhalation tinting the air with ice. Down on the street, a constable's whistle blew, fell silent, blew again, this time truncated, like a word swallowed by regret. Morning delivered rumors. A hansom cab overturned outside Smithfield Market when the horse reared at phantoms only it perceived. At St. Bartholomew's, an entire ward awoke screaming of drowning simultaneously. The London Gazette printed the events alongside speculation of swamp gas. Finch washed black residue from his hands, noticing it glittered like coal dust wherever sunlight struck. Days passed in creeping twilight. Customers dwindled. Those who came found the photographer haggard, his voice halved between apology and warning. When he dared accept a commission, the resulting plates displayed nothing at all, though the sitters swore they'd felt touches on their shoulders. The ghosts, it seemed, were done posing. He pondered the paradox while sitting before a soot-clogged grate. Spirits had worn the plates like borrowed coats. He'd offered them subsequent garments, and they entered willingly. But something larger, a convergence of untraversed grief, now prowled. Perhaps his treatments had brewed a hunger and residue too faded for identity. He recalled Mrs. Kestrel's caution, "The aperture may widen too far." The confrontation came on a feral Tuesday when clouds sagged low enough to brush chimney pots. Finch was coating fresh glass with collodion when the studio door banged open of its own accord. Wind carried a fetid odor, an estuary at ebb tide. Darkness roiled across the ceiling. From that swirling ink descended a figure approximating human shape, but fluid as molasses. Its torso was a pillar of smoke, its head a blindfold of ash. Iron manacles clanked at its wrists, though no chain attached. "Photographer," the thing croaked in a voice of crushed ice. "You frame us, then fling us into night. We are homeless, and you are architect of storm." Finch's knees buckled. "I intended only to prove," the specter mocked. "Proof is coffin to possibility. We are not collections for your cabinet." It gestured, and a gale erupted, slamming cupboards. Plates rattled, their corners chipping. From the drawers, the cracked negatives began to spit shards like volcanic glass. Each shard shattered again upon the floor, releasing miniature phantoms who darted about squealing in plank-toned tongues. Finch crawled to the camera tripod, using it like a crutch. The walnut box contained a lens polished so brightly it reflected the storm perfectly. An idea, a final remedy, flashed. If the glass plates had become prison walls, perhaps clear glass could be a gate. He ripped the bellows free, leaving only lens and hollow chamber. Lifting the contraption overhead, he shouted words he half remembered from Theosophist's tracts. "Pax in transitu, vertitur speculum." Light poured through the lens like water down a sluice. Every window imploded inward, shards spinning but never touching him. The smaller spirits fled toward that bright column, their cries changing from agony to astonishment. The smoky colossus resisted. Its manacles sparked against invisible ruts, sparks that turned to blossoms of bleeding poppies. Finch staggered closer, thrusting the camera's hollow maw at the thing's chest. "Return," he whispered, "or remain, but choose." The specter drew back, as though tasting choice for the first time. Then, with the sound of sailcloth tearing, it collapsed into ribbons that whipped round the lens and vanished. Silence followed so abrupt, Finch swore he'd gone deaf. Dust settled. Broken glass carpeted the floor like untended frost, yet not a sliver cut his skin. He lowered the camera. Its lens was now opaque, filled with swirling white crowd arrested mid-roll. 3 breaths later, Mrs. Whitcliffe burst in, clutching an iron poker, her gray hair escaping pins. She surveyed devastation with eyes that had seen plague memorials, but nothing like this. "Out," Finch said quietly. "I'm finished here." He packed what remained, notebooks, a single clean plate and the camera, the lens sealed by whatever limbo now churned within. He left coins for rent atop the mantel, though he suspected no tenant would occupy the studio again. Outside, London seemed unaltered, but he perceived a new stillness under the traffic's din, like a string recently tuned. The fog cooled his cheeks with familiar affection. At the corner he paused. A costermonger's daughter laughed, and her breath ghosted in the frigid air, then dissipated like all mortal exhalations should. Finch nodded once, reassured. He walked north toward the station, where locomotives waited to fling passengers into the raw countryside. To what destination he did not decide. Only distance mattered, a place where no one asked for proof of ghosts, where no glass pane mirrored back the faces of those who could not move on. Yet, long after Holborn dropped behind the horizon, Finch felt the weight slung from his shoulder. The camera boxed tight in canvas. Occasionally it shuddered, gently as a creature dreaming. He told himself the movement was merely the train, the horse, the boat, depending on conveyance. Night upon night he debated hurling the contraption into ravine or channel, but always he stayed his hand, mesmerized by the faint luminescence pulsing inside the lens, a lighthouse imprisoned within quartz. On a September evening in a coastal village north of Aberdeen, he rented a loft above a cooper's yard. There he resumed ordinary portraiture. Children beside barrels, fishermen holding nets. The villagers knew nothing of his London past, only that the newcomer never photographed after dusk and kept his negatives in a tin trunk weighted with rocks. One stormy afternoon a knock rattled his loft door. Constance Kestrel entered, attire rain-splashed yet elegant. She eyed the tin trunk, the sealed camera gripped like a reliquary. "You listened poorly," she chided. "You opened the aperture wide as the wind's mouth." "I'm closing it now," he answered. "Merely pausing," she corrected. "Glass alone cannot dismiss longing. One must unmake the desire to look." Finch sat beside the trunk, fingers stroking its lid. "I have learned that framing something halts time, but not sorrow. Perhaps all photography is hubris." "Perhaps," she agreed, "yet hubris sometimes ferries progress. What remains is settlement. Spirits unmoored become storms. Storms unsketched become myth." She knelt, placed a thin silver dagger on the crate. Its blade reflected neither of them. "Pierce the lens, shatter it from within. Only then will the road behind you truly end." Finch lifted the dagger, weighing its promise. The lens pearl glow throbbed, conjuring faint silhouettes, faces that might have been grateful or accusing. Mrs. Kestrel stepped back. He drew a breath, remembering fog and lanterns, the hush before a shutter fall. With a cry equal parts lamentation and relief, he plunged the dagger. Glass splintered. A current of air roared outward, scattering papers, extinguishing the lamp. Through the bursting dark he heard choruses neither joyful nor furious, only finished. When the tempest subsided, he stood alone, dagger fractured, camera hollow, its lens a ring of grit. Outside the storm lifted. Moonlight washed the yard, untroubled and silver. Finch peeled open the loft's small window. Salt wind entered, carrying gull calls and nothing more. Behind him, Mrs. Kestrel had gone. On the bare floor where she'd stood rested the velvet pouch of gallows breath, its seams now empty. He tied its drawstring, slipped it into his coat, and descended the stairs. Weathercock Vanes above the village whirred 16 points before settling true north, a direction he took on foot, leaving camera shards glinting behind him like fragments of a bad dream, already forgetting its dreamer. He journeyed onward, cameraless, unsought, another pedestrian step among countless in London's empire of roads. Whenever a passerby raised a box brownie to capture a seaside cliff or laughing child, he turned away, not from fear of ghosts, those had finally moved on, but from sudden tenderness for moments allowed to die their natural deaths, unfettered by silver salts or human need. Let memory suffice, he thought. Let law speak in silence. And yet, some nights, when fog drapes the North Sea and windows bead with spectral dew, Erasmus Finch wakes and feels the faintest suction at his palm, as though a shutter still wishes to close. He opens his hand, shows it empty, and exhales into darkness until breath warms, disperses, and joins the honest air where no image lingers, no frame intrudes, and every ghost, having tasted freedom, declines to return.